when I hit start, I thought we had already started the session. So don't worry, everybody joining into this a little bit. Okay, what's happening? We did not miss anything important. You only missed the sponsor sound. So welcome once again to everybody who's joining. I see a lot more people have joined in now. I can see all of you joining in from Brazil. Oh my God, there's a lot of people now. Please drop in the chat where you're joining in from so that say hello. And please confirm if you can hear me, just so that before I say any more, I can actually understand that all of you can hear me. Yes. Okay. I get, yes, we can hear. Perfect. So it's working now this time. Welcome today. We have an amazing session lined up for you. I am Pragya, your Rev Genius host. And today we are bringing you a topic that has been on demand. I have been told by so many people in the community, especially the RevOps community, that this is something that all of you have often discussed. Not sure if you know all the answers, some of you know some. So it's really nice that I'm bringing you three experts who can actually shed light on this very, very interesting topic about how do you building the first RevOps team in a startup. Is it one person? Is it multiple? Is it fractional? What do you need to do? What are the different options? So I am so excited that our experts will tell you all about it. Before we get started, I am going to tell you that this webinar today has been brought to you by one of our sponsors, Apparatus, who is the RevOps community partner with RevGenius. They help growing companies optimize their sales and marketing processes and drive business results. With that said, Rosalind, over to you this time for real.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, welcome everybody. Super excited to dive into this topic today. I think this is one of those questions that lots of folks ask about, how do I build, when is the right time to bring in our first RevOps team? What does that look like? Kind of the when, what, and how. So, I'm Rosalind Santelena. I'm the founder at the RevOps Collective, where we are focused on elevating, empowering, and enabling revenue operations, really the function and the people. I'm a longtime RevOps leader, super passionate about, RevOps, but also the topic today. So I'm excited to dive in. First, I'd like to welcome our panelists and maybe let them introduce themselves. Jessica, do you want to start?
Absolutely. I love this topic. Hi, guys. I'm Jessica. I am based out of Denver, Colorado. I'm a RevOps advisor for Activate the Magic. And again, a longtime efficiency enthusiast. I started using Salesforce.com in 2005-06. So really early adopter when I thought web to lead forms were like the coolest thing since sliced bread. seeing that evolve is really awesome. So good, bad, and ugly. Seen a lot of it. Happy to talk about it.
I'm excited to partner with you again, Jessica. I know we've done some events together in the past, so this is really fun. And Jason, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself? Although I'm sure you don't need an introduction here.
We'll see. So my name is Jason Hubbard. I'm COO here at RevGenius out of Knoxville, Tennessee. Have served primarily in a variety of roles on the marketing, demand gen, growth, partnership side of things, which raises a pretty obvious question of what in the world am I doing sitting on a panel on operations with a COO title? And I think it'll probably have a lot to bear on the topic at hand because I've worked at early stage startups for most of my career. And so, most of those, actually all of those, I never had a COO within any of those. And so, I got to wear a lot of hats, one of those being the RevOps hat. And so, actually going to be very interested to see how this conversation plays out and whether we've done it the wrong way, the incorrect way, or whatever, or how much of that were actual valuable insights into how we actually managed and navigated all of that.
Yeah, love it. Love it. Well, welcome to both of you. I'm excited to dive in. I know folks have been putting some questions in the chat. Definitely welcome Q&A. So put your questions in the chat, and I think Jason's going to help us monitor. But as they come in, obviously we'll take your questions either during the session or after the session. We'll leave some, or towards the end of the session, we'll leave some time. So let's just dive right in. I think the first question people always ask me is at which stage should a startup really start thinking about RevOps? Would love to hear your take. Maybe Jason's having had some experience or multiple experiences in startups. What's kind of your canned answer when people ask you?
I mean, if you're asking when should you start thinking about RevOps, you start thinking about RevOps day one.
Yeah.
When should you start building a RevOps team or hiring for it? The answer is going to be it depends, and it depends on where the needs and the priorities are relative to that. So I would argue and say that if you're doing a more longer sales cycle, enterprise, higher ACV type
Mhm.
structure with your go to market, then arguably there may be less of a need earlier on to do that, just because you've got less volume of things that you're dealing with and stuff like that. If you're dealing with largely no touch, low touch, PLG, self-serve type motions, then you probably need to prioritize that a little bit earlier on in that process. So that's kind of where I've seen it on my side of it.
Yeah, thank you. No, I was going to say that we're like 6 minutes in and you already use the "it depends" answer. I always hear that right when it comes to RevOps. So it's always like the "it depends," but and then kind of the caveats behind it. But yeah, I agree. Jessica, what do you think?
Yeah, there's going to be a disclaimer, a lot of "it depends" prefaces to these answers, but no, I agree. Day one, and this doesn't mean going out and putting a RevOps rec on your team. Day one, no, it's the discipline of RevOps, right? That must be there day one, right? The discipline of architecting your revenue in order to achieve sustainable growth. The discipline to, again, not just build a RevOps team, but be focused on using data to remove pride from conversations, critical day one, and creating and empowering data literacy throughout the organization, day one. So making sure that you have those models, bring those models to life. That's what a startup should have day one, because models and math, they make us smarter. More math, less words. And that's what I think about when you say, think about RevOps on day one, regardless of title or team structure. The elements and discipline of RevOps has to be there day one.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say I second that, but I think a very underappreciated aspect of RevOps, especially around like the data and the process side of things, is it comes wildly down to culture. And so if you've got a culture around, hey, we want to be able to track these things, we're going to prioritize, being able to get the data and maintaining, the data quality, all of that stuff, then it's going to make all of this stuff so much easier, because you're never going to be able to fully automate, those sides of it. And so it does require culture. And if anybody has experience in trying to build or drive a culture, you start doing that day one, and it's so much easier to build in the right direction than it is to course correct.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's about the mindset, right? I think both of you kind of touched on, because I always tell people it's like same thing. The earlier, the better. And again, kind of like what Jessica was saying, it doesn't mean that you need a full-blown RevOps function or hire a VP of RevOps, but you need to start thinking about the components, right, of RevOps and kind of putting in play just that mindset, and then start to build that right infrastructure and that foundation, because process and data, both of you kind of touched on both of those. But I think it is about mindset. It's about thinking in terms of how am I going to make this repeatable, right, and be able to help scale the business. But it's also, I think, having that data and just that information available in the right mindset means that then you can start, especially in this type of market that we've been in the last couple of years, be able to really figure out where should I be applying my resources, right? What should I be doing, and be able to do that, in a very intentional way, given the limited resources that we have. Having said that, I think a lot of times we think about, we don't need a full-blown team, but we need to start thinking about it. But let's say we start thinking about, well, we want to start thinking about that, but we don't have the resources. Maybe I'm the founder, I'm the CEO, and I'm really not that right person to be, because I just don't have an operational mindset. I think the good news is that in the market right now, we have so many different options, right, for helping to build some of that ops mindset and foundation, right? There's like freelance workers, there's consultants, there's all this, you can obviously hire in-house at different levels. There's fractional, right? Whatever we want to call it, there's so many different options. Advisory work, right? Like Jessica, you're doing from a consulting perspective too. But what are some of the different options maybe that you've seen, and like where do you think, like how do you think founders should start thinking about what type of option they should be leveraging? Maybe Jessica, can we start with you, since I'm sure you see this with clients? I do the same.
This is another depends, but it
Yeah.
depends. This is answers the options that you have for depends, right? We're all iterative, agile people that can make decisions quickly, so we need that data. So if you do the math on your company's financial business model, it'll more or less shine a light on the areas that need attention. So you could read a stat that says, hey, investing in RevOps is 10 to 20% increase in sales productivity. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yeah.
Great. So if it's a 10 to 20% increase in sales productivity, if I do RevOps good, right, I could do that and say, yes, revenue, cool, good. But then if I look at the full picture of financial model, maybe I'm dipping too far into a COGS line item, cost of goods sold line item, right, which is also important for RevOps to understand that whole financial model. So we could be in the juice isn't worth the squeeze territory, and we over pivoted. So if that's the case, that's why I think fractional work, especially if you're in that under 10 million, 24-month CAC payback period, I think it's a sweet spot to really pivot into more highly skilled in-house RevOps team. But anything under that, you might, not want the risk of either hiring somebody that's more inexperienced or lower cost, because you might get somebody from a formerly siloed ops team, right? So you might get a really good MOPS person, but maybe they're not good at the COGS part of it or sales ops part. And you risk burnout and scalability issues. Or maybe you over pivot on a platform that says, hey, we do RevOps for you. And then you burn money into that tech stack, and you're actually not solving a problem that maybe a well-skilled operator can see 5 moves out for you, right? So I think there's a tipping point where I think a good in-house skilled operator should live. But again, that's making sure that you have ownership of your full financial model to see where you can pull those levers.
Yeah, that's great advice, kind of thinking from a financial perspective also, right? Because there's just so many different options. And again, it depends, but I think looking at some of that. Jason, I also have some thoughts on that, but Jason, would love to hear from you.
Yeah, so on the fractional front, this is actually a pretty ideal, compelling time to examine or look at going that route, because one of the upshots or things that came out of the restructuring and the layoffs and all of that stuff that have happened across the board, but predominantly in the tech space, or at least led the charge on that side of it. You've got a ton of really good talent out there that's available. And a lot of that talent has gone that fractional, consulting contract route with it. And so you've got the ability to be able to tap into and pull people in that are pretty world class in a lot of cases, that you, in a different environment, you would not have been able to get access to. And so you would have had to go and try and poach them, or shell out a large annual salary or whatever on those fronts. And so it's a huge opportunity to be able to leverage a talent pool that you wouldn't typically have out there right now. And these are things that typically are pretty tight network. And so, leaders in these spaces typically know others. And so, if your needs don't align with the person you're talking to, or they don't have the bandwidth or availability, typically they'll be able to point you in the direction of somebody that's really gonna solve for that. Something that I'm a perfect example of relative to like timing, especially in an early stage company or startup, is start with what your current internal resources are. So even though I've been in, growth roles, marketing roles, in fact, the reason why I would call myself primarily a growth marketing marketer, a growth person, not even limiting it to growth marketing, is because I started assuming these types of roles out of necessity and out of inclination. So, I had to go in and build. I essentially became a self-trained Salesforce admin, because our Salesforce admin was also our technical founder and CEO. And so trying to get any answers or feedback or anything like that out of him was a futile exercise most of the time. And so me being me, I was like, okay, I'm going to go figure this out. I'm going to go do it on my own. So you leverage those internal resources that you have. If you've got somebody within leadership that has an inclination or talent around that, then a lot of times you can go and backfill what they need from an admin perspective or an analyst perspective or whatever, where you can focus on those supporting roles and capacities, as opposed to having to lead with a leadership type role within that. And so I'd just say start with what you've got, and see where your deficiencies and needs primarily are, and then go backfill from there.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that advice because I always think, if you start with, where you're trying to go, right? Your goals and your objectives, like what are your biggest pain points? And then what do you have, in house? And then obviously, like we always approach any project, right? It's kind of like, what are the goals you're trying to achieve? And what are those things that are preventing you from hitting those targets? And then you're trying to address that gap, right? So sometimes it could be setting up your CRM is something that you need. And that that oftentimes makes sense to have somebody external do it because to your point, Jason, they have the talent, they have the expertise, they can probably do it in a way that's much more efficient and optimized and with some best practices in mind also to help you build some of that. But I think depending on what your challenges are, now you have the sort of, menu of people that you can go and select, say, I really need someone to help me build a lead, pipeline generation model. I need somebody to really help me build out my quote to cash process or, different pieces of operations or even just building out all the right insights and the right metrics that I need. And now you can kind of tap into that without committing to somebody full time, paying a pretty large, annual OTE, but being able to really tap into somebody who has really strong, strength in that area and can really bring value very quickly. So yeah, definitely. I think that that is definitely a case. And then I think as you start to grow, though, it starts to make sense to bring people in-house, right? Because then you maintain that knowledge and that information, and then you have somebody who's kind of governing and managing that moving forward. But think about if you're thinking about kind of building out that first team, then what does a foundational kind of RevOps team structure look like? And we'll get the it depends out of the way first. But I think, I think there's still some primary kind of pillars. I always think about things in buckets. So I think there's some primary pillars there of what I would look at to kind of build first. Jason, do you have some ideas there?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to go back to the start with what you've got and where your needs are, and then build around and out from that. And so then that's going to depend on internal talent and expertise that you have. It's going to depend on type of contract, fractional, whatever that you may have access to or be able to leverage for resources. And it's also going to depend on what internal go-to-market needs that you have. As sort of alluded to, and I've worked with companies and products that ran the gambit from extremely high velocity, low ACV, PLG, all the way up to 6-7 figure enterprise type products. And on the enterprise side, like when we were doing that, it was a relatively small team when I started, and it's a relatively small number of ops that you're trying to work and close. And so that's much more manageable to do from that capacity versus on the PLG side. Like by the time I left, we were doing 2,500-3,000 trial starts a month. And like, there's no way you can do that or manage that unless your ops is nailed down. And so, those needs and priorities are going to shift based off of those, really those three types of criteria. What resources do you have internally? What are your needs relative to go to market? And then what are your external resources?
Yep. Yep. Jessica, what would you add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've seen, and my opinion has shifted over the years and sometimes daily. But when I hear RevOps, I remember being on teams, and I'm sure people in this audience can relate. Is let's say you have MOPS, you have a MOPS role, and this was pre-RevOps. It was all RevOps. So pre-RevOps, and you're trying to do, wait, I'm the campaign manager and I'm responsible for Marketo and I can move data all over the place, but I can't create a field in Salesforce, right? Because I'm not on sales ops or I'm not in IT, right? So you slow that process down. So I said, so RevOps, that's a silver bullet. Just create a big old neutral team of everybody, roll it up to the CRO, roll it up to a CRO, and everybody's responsible for the data pipeline is on one team. Now both of those work. I think both of those types of structures have merit. I think the latter, where you roll up everybody in the supply chain, works better in earlier stages to have everybody responsible there. That way, fields and objects can be created, integrations can be created, methodologies can be established. Your backlog can be all in one place. But then as you grow, then you hire, a sales analyst that rolls up into sales. Then those lines get blurred, and then shadow ops is created and somebody's building something over here that doesn't scale. So you definitely need to iterate as you grow, which is why, again, bringing in a RevOps advisor could really help make those lines a little bit clearer. But I think somebody in the Q&A asked, I think that's the biggest difference between RevOps and SalesOps is RevOps is the full gamut of data supply chain from lead to cash, whereas traditional SalesOps tends to be from pipeline creation to deal close.
Yep. Yeah. Todd was asking the question about, how do you kind of see the main differences? And I have sort of the same definition as you, Jessica, around just RevOps to me is everything that supports really that entire revenue engine, right? End to end, top of funnel, from marketing through that whole entire sales cycle for a customer to become from prospect to customer and then repeat customer, obviously in SaaS. But even in hardware, right? We're still selling more boxes. We still want to ship more and we still have support and services and such to provide. So I do see it kind of end to end. Although, sales ops is more kind of that middle of the funnel, right? A piece of it. When I think about kind of a RevOps team and just that foundational structure, I also think about, just the kind of those pillars of, you have that kind of day-to-day ops support, right? Just to keep the engine running and supporting your marketers and your sales and your customer, facing or customer supporting team. And then I think about kind of, we talked about data and insights and reporting. I think that's kind of its own bucket, but just process, right? Kind of that operations, a big part of our roles is that process creation and optimization to be able to, not only set the right expectations for the team and be able to make sure that everyone's aligned on, how we run our business, but be able to constantly improve those processes and make them scalable. And then along the same lines, I think another area that, teams should probably focus in on, especially if you're in a high growth or you're in a period where you're hiring a lot of new talent, is that enablement and training. I think we're always on our soapbox about process and systems and governance around data. But I think one of the things that sometimes gets missed is just the enablement and training aspect of it and being able to provide all that good work that you're doing around process and data and systems and make sure that people are actually following the process and leveraging them and using the tools that we've, invested lots of money in and actually being able to provide us feedback so that we're continuing to improve that. So I definitely appreciate some of those areas. Now that we're kind of thinking about the types of roles, right? We kind of talked about different types of roles. You can have kind of more the generalist that kind of does a little bit of everything. You can have very specialized type of roles. And a lot of times I think we start with generalist in a startup, and then we start to break out into more specialized. And then that's how sometimes those silos get created, right? If you don't have oversight over the entire funnel. But maybe digging a little bit deeper into the types of roles, right? Like, what do you see in terms of kind of experience or skill level, right, that you should be hiring for these types of roles? Because I think one mistake that I've seen a lot of times is instead of, before there was kind of this consultant or fractional, really broadly available, this type of talent, like Jason was mentioning, companies would hire sort of a Salesforce admin, right, in-house. And then they expect all of a sudden it's like, okay, now my Salesforce admin, you know what, I'm going to give you a head of RevOps title. And now you're just responsible. And you're supposed to, right? And you're supposed to magically know how to do pipeline creation and do marketing automation and be able to run a deals desk and, do quoting and customer enablement and all of these things. And so I see that happen a lot in organizations. And then they decide, oh, I need to hire. Now I should really hire a leader. And then many times, I'm sure, Jessica, you've had this experience because I know I have as a practitioner getting hired in and goes like, oh my gosh, what is happening here? Right? Because now you have to go and spend a lot of time tearing things down and rebuilding. So any recommendations on sort of what level, companies should be hiring for in these types of roles? And I don't know, Jessica, do you want to start?
I'm happy to start. So regardless of the pillars of RevOps, right? I'm going to say something that's really simple, and everybody, especially RevOps, hates this word, but everybody has to be project management. I'm not talking, waterfall and like really, stringent methodologies, but needing to understand how to gather, create, execute, and communicate requirements and requests. That sits above. I think that's my North Star for the role. So, okay, so now that we have that established, I think that's a critical skill. And then we go into the pillars of RevOps. So when you're looking for the skills of RevOps, I think it sits in one of 4 pillars. I think Roz and I are on the same page with our pillar analogy, and I'm sure we're aligned here.
All ops people think in buckets, categories, and pillars.
And frameworks. Oh my. So I have insights and analytics, right? This is actually an order of operations is how I see them weighted, right? Like your P0 to P4 skills, if you will. So insights and analytics. So that's driving your vital few KPIs, turning your data into stories that drive conversations on various levels of difficulty, right? Again, going back to what Jason said, establishing a culture so that you can have those tough conversations led by data. Number 2, the day-to-day operations, your go-to-market operations, your Salesforce admins that were turned into RevOps people. So they're important, still absolutely critical. We still need to send out our newsletters. We still need to do our lead scoring. We still need to do our CPQ and our comp plans. We need to automate that. So that pillar is extremely important. The 3rd pillar is our tech stack and architecture. Now, this is where it gets a little hairy because we live circa now in 2023, where a lot of these integrations are a hell of a lot easier than they were 10, 20 years ago. So maybe with this role, you can start off, right, with your CRM, your market automation platform, and a NetSuite or something like that. And you don't need an enterprise architect for that. But then if you get to a point where, hey, customers are churning because their invoices aren't correct or they're slow. Well, that's because there's a manual process and the person that owns that pillar just doesn't have the technical chops. So then you up level that skill, right? So then the 4th pillar is, like Rosalind said, this RevOps enablement role who owns a definition, owns the lexicon of the entire organization. We all know and play with the single source of truth of data is dead. However, that's for your data, not for your KPIs and your lexicon. So I think that should live in that pillar too. So this could be one person, bless their souls, for all the go-to-market functions. Or it could be a person per pillar, per function, or it could be multiple people per pillar, per function. So if you kind of start with the key skills that you want to fit your culture, then kind of place them into these pillars, maybe there's some overlap. It's more of a constellation than it is a, one-to-one type of relationship between all the pillars and the skills. Then you could, continue to invest in those. So that's kind of where I think about like project managers, your pillars, your skills, and then the scale of those skills.
Yeah, I love that. And I think one of the things I would just add there, and kind of Jason mentioned it earlier, was also kind of assessing what's on your bench. Right. I always talk about like, what do you have strength in on your bench that you can cover? Like if maybe your finance team, like you have a really good finance, FP&A person that can help you with some of the capacity planning and headcount planning, right? So maybe that's not an area you need to necessarily hire as much for, or you have somebody who's really good at systems and you actually are blessed with somebody with almost an IT team, which I miss that from when I worked for a large company. But let's say you actually had an IT team, maybe you could leverage them for some of that, or God forbid, a PMO team, which I also had in a really large company that can actually help you run big projects. But yeah, definitely.
Some of the best marketing analysts I've known have come actually from finance, from FP&A.
Yes. Yeah. I think a lot of times they come from kind of a finance background. They have that analytical kind of mindset, right? Which is another thing that I think is really interesting about RevOps that maybe is relevant to this question, is that you don't need to necessarily hire people who just have a RevOps title, right? Because people who can do RevOps can come from data analysis or strategy positions, or an IT role or finance role, or even a learning and development role. So from all different walks of life, but they have the right skill set that you're looking for in the role. Jason, what would you add? Kind of what have you seen in terms of kind of experience and skill level?
Yeah, I mean, I'll begin with I absolutely prefer to do what you were talking about there at the end, Rosalind, of finding somebody that does not necessarily have a direct, work history, title, whatever, around RevOps. So In particular, like I love to go and find somebody that, has a background in marketing or sales or, something like that, that has a RevOps inclination, because they bring, that knowledge of both sides of the equation. They bring the knowledge of the people that are actually going to be the quote unquote customers of what RevOps is doing, and what they're trying to achieve and the ins and outs of all of that, while being able to apply that. I like to think that's a lot of the strength that I've brought to the equation, and kind of those dual roles that I've had to play with most of those companies. Before I jump into the rest, I answer this one really quickly. Jennifer was asking, the RevOps community of professionals that I was mentioning, as far as like contractors and stuff like that out there. She's asking, where do you find that? And the quickest and easiest place to do it, first piece of advice, just ask. Just start asking people, asking questions, because they may not be, but they'll know somebody, or they'll know somebody that knows somebody. And so that's the place pretty universally to begin. And one of the ideal places to do that would be in a context or environment of a community like RevGenius. And so go into the RevOps micro community channel and just start asking. You got a lot of people in there that will lean in, be willing to jump in and help, make introductions, and you may even find that person within that space. And so, across the board, the more people you ask, the more you put it out there, the quicker you're going to get networked into, those people that you're looking for. As far as seniority within it, again, it's going to depend on the needs and what you have internally. But, I would look at it primarily around, I think the people that you need more senior are going to be those that are going to kind of be the architects of it. You can arguably be less senior within like the individuals that are in the supporting roles around that, as far as like an analyst or a tech admin or something like that. But all of those have double-edged swords to them. And even on the architect side of things, I've seen it play out where like you bring in somebody extremely experienced and senior, but they're trying to push a round peg in a square hole, because this is what worked previously for them, and it may not necessarily work there. And so no matter where they are in a seniority or experience level, the two things I look for in hiring, and it's not just on the RevOps side of things, that I don't think has ever steered me wrong. I look for people that have intellectual curiosity and have hustle, and are going to take ownership of. And if I can find those two things, I can train them. I can find supporting, people within, whatever those technical aspects are, or whatever. But those two things are things that I can't, typically teach or cultivate in somebody. You may argue that they're, by the time they're out there in their careers, the ship sailed on that capacity. But if you bring those two things to the table, I can do just about anything with you.
Yeah, I love that curiosity piece, because I do think that, as ops, kind of having that ops mindset, you're always kind of curious, right? You're always wondering why, and you're always digging into the kind of the why, and be constantly learning. Because I think we always, I always talk about this, when there's chaos and things that are happening, that ops people, lean in, we run towards it, right? Where everyone else is kind of slowly backing away, we like run towards it, and we want to know what's going on. We want to make sense of the chaos, right? But we're also folks that want to try and are open to trying new things to tackle new problems, right? Because there's always better ways to do it, right?
And I think I think that's why the communities are so important. So even if you're in a community in RevGenius, what I do all the time, I say I control F my entire life. not the most eloquent. I'll go in and I'll be like, hey, where is this? Hey, have you used this piece of technology before? And I go, nope, never have. So I go into RevGenius, I do the search, I type it in, and I see what people are talking about it. And then I say, okay, this is instead of me, and then I go and Google it. And then at very last resort, I'll submit a web form. But unlikely. I started with first, just to see what people are doing and talking about it. Because you're right, operators love to, questions is like our speed, right? We love to get that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think just being naturally curious, asking questions, but then also, leaning on other people, because one of the things in operations is you don't have to start from scratch and recreate the wheel every single time, right? I mean, there's, the problems that we're facing.
Outline that statement. Yes.
Yeah. I tell people that all the time, right? Because it doesn't, and it also doesn't mean that you take somebody's blueprint of how they created the wheel and you replicate that, right? Because what you do is use it as a guide, get you started, and then you build on the whole, it depends for what you're trying to solve, and build something for what makes sense for you. And also asking questions. I think the ops community and like the Rev Genius community as well, the broader team or the broader community, you'll be so surprised by how willing people are to share. I think a lot of times people say, "Oh, I don't really want to ask a question. I don't, I think my question might be dumb, or people might not want to help me." But I think you'll be really surprised if you reach out how many people will actually be helpful. Right? People really want to be able to share and help others. So yeah, I guess I would say don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to reach out to people.
Yeah, Jason, I mean, to build on that, willingness to jump in and answer questions and stuff like that. Think of it this way: we're kind of an odd bunch on the ops side of things, and I think you sort of alluded to it, Rosalind. Like, to a very large degree, we can't help ourselves. Like, this is just the way that we think about things and stuff. And so, the opportunity to talk shop with somebody else that gets it, is something that I at least jump at. The other piece of it, though, is how many of us have gone and like really taken a pass at like a really tough thing, and like, hey, we came up with something that was like really cool and innovative that nobody internally gets, understands, recognizes, whatever. So if you get an opportunity to go out and share that with somebody, that's one, going to appreciate it, and two, go put it to work, and make you feel kind of, be able to share the pride that you had and that thing that you built and that nut that you cracked. Like, there's a lot of internal motivations why people would be very excited to jump in and engage on these things.
Yeah, I've been talking about this ops therapy for like the past 4 years, because I find that when you talk to other ops people, I have this whole hashtag ops therapy, because it is very therapeutic. And I think people who are ops folks, when you get on a call or even a chat with another ops person, you say something and just the empathy and the true authentic understanding of what you're thinking, what you're feeling just immediately comes across, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, there's validation. I always tell people, around like coaching and stuff, it's like, hey, sometimes it's just validation of, that what you're thinking makes sense and that you're not crazy, that other people are going through it. And then kind of talking about, maybe a couple different ways that you maybe haven't thought about how to tackle a problem and how maybe others have done so, that you can just kind of put in your toolkit of options to try out. Awesome. Well, let's talk about team of one. So I've been a team of one at a startup. I've also led, 25 plus people in an enterprise company. So I've kind of seen, I always like to say, I've seen the good and the bad and the ugly of operations. But how can you make a RevOps team of one setup work? And maybe for how long can that actually work for a company?
Yeah. I think if you have those intangibles that Jason and we were talking about, the humble, hungry, naturally curious, love this stuff, you'd be surprised what you could do with the team. Now, if somebody, if you were to kind of force me to put a stake in the ground where I think that tipping point happens, I think up until you get to that 10 million ARR point, it's a stretch, and it's not a stretch because that doesn't work. It just doesn't scale. You can't scale on a superstar culture. You build like a Jenga and you start to go out like this, and it crumbles. So, and not to mention, as soon as you go, does anybody ever do the diagram with the hiring patterns of the go-to-market function and hiring ops?
Yep.
So when you start to get up to that 10 million range, I've seen that is a tipping point where either bringing in more freelance or bringing in an in-house person to really take it from 10 million to 50 million. It's a very different motion. So again, if I were to put a stake in the ground for that, I would say, yeah, that's pretty much where that team of one can,
Phil.
For now.
Jason, what do you think?
Yeah, it's going to be largely a repeat of things that I've said thus far. It's going to, it's going to depend on what internal talents you have, how talented they are, but in particular, your go-to-market needs. So, like I said, in a lot of, instances and cases, like that's not as pressing a need. And so you've got ability to be able to better manage, what you're doing on that side of things, just from the volume of deals, ops, the number of team members, all of that stuff. It allows you to get away with, fewer people and that, team of one for longer. The more technical it is from an operational standpoint, the more volume that you're pushing through, the more that you're having to just keep up track of and juggle, the more complicated your go-to-market motions are. Those needs are going to get wildly out of control under the guidance of a single person relatively quickly. And so, it's, do it based off of your needs, but try and be forward looking and keeping a finger on the pulse of where you are in the process of being able to keep up with those things. Because what you really want to avoid, if you absolutely possibly can, is getting behind the 8 ball where stuff starts falling apart, or you start creating big messes that are going to have to go get cleaned up. And, before you go and start, building out and adding to that team of one, because now you've, handicapped your ability to scale and all of that stuff, because you're having to sort of pause. I mean, it's a terrible way to enter into a team. I've got to ramp myself, get my arms around all of this stuff, and I got to go clean up messes. And talk about a heavy lift for somebody new.
Yeah. 100%.
And I know it sucks and we don't like it, but I have to go back to the project management position of it, because this will give you the ammo and let you drink your own champagne with your own RevOps data. If you go to your CEO and you hit that 5-6 million range, and you said, hey, I have 100 items in my backlog that's low effort and high value, I cannot get to them. Then maybe you bring in consultants, but then you say, hey, I have 100 items in my backlog that are high effort and high value. I need headcount. I need somebody that understands the business, can really commit to these projects. These are long-term projects. So having that, good contracts make good friends, right? Those SLAs of what's going in my backlog and communicating everything that we're working on is really important. And I think RevOps forget about that, because we do a lot of cool stuff, and that's the least sexy part of our job. But it's still important. Yes.
Yeah, I think that's a good recommendation. Maybe, just from a team of one perspective, around making sure that you are, highlighting and communicating the value and the impact that you're bringing to the business, right? Because that is going to
really fast.
Yeah, and that will help you build the use case and kind of the business case, I should say,
for your own cheerleader. You have to tell your stories, because operators know that we only get the attention when stuff done broke.
Something's broken.
Right?
Yep.
Exactly.
That's
so
right.
having those stories and really communicating what you're working on a regular basis will really help mitigate that burnout for the team of one.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you both covered a lot of that. I want to maybe just add one more thing, maybe from a different angle, from a founder perspective, is around the fact that when you hire one person to do what you're calling RevOps, chances are there are a lot of people in the organization that are doing RevOps work. Right. And it's not the RevOps person. And so I think this is advice that I always give to CEOs and early stage founders is think about, like, when you're VP of, your head of sales, whatever that title is, your main sales leader is focused on writing playbooks, creating process, doing some of these analytics and such, instead of going out there and building a strategic plan to go acquire net new customers or keep the customers that you have. Because then your sales leader or even your marketing leader is focused on things that are more ops related, instead of going to do the things that you're paying them to go do, and that their talent really should be spent, their time and talent should be spent on doing. That's another reason why you want to hire ops people who are also probably much better at creating process and playbooks and such, right? And can go build those things the right way for you, while your, like I said, sales, marketing, customer leaders are going to do those other things too. That would be the other sort of thing to think about. I want to make sure that I know we have a couple other questions that we were going to cover, but I also want to make sure that we cover any questions in the Q&A that might be.
Yeah, we've got quite a few in here, so if you
Okay.
wanted to go through some of these, and then if we've got time for one or two others internally for the panel. First one, how do you fix blind spots or revenue leaks in the current process where RevOps is spread across marketing, sales, and CS? So, especially in those early stages where you've got a team of one or a team of just a handful, and you oftentimes don't have specialization within those different ops roles. What do you guys have to say on that front?
How do you fix the blind spots? Oh,
blind spots in the role and the skill set of that person, or blind spots in the journey
in the actual operation. So your processes or your tech stack or your data. Oftentimes leadership that doesn't have an experience on the ops side of the equation may not be recognizing, even aware of.
Yeah.
I have just a quick thought there, because that could be a whole topic of itself, right? Like a leaky funnel webinar. But in simplest terms, I like to look at the whole lead to cash funnel. Look up the bow tie methodology or the bow tie framework. That's how my brain works. I've always been a funnel person. People say the funnel is dead. I say, no, we need something for data. So volume, conversion, velocity at every stage of your funnel. Define what those are, measure, benchmark, see how far you are from benchmark, and then see where you need to fix. For example, if you have a win rate that's 18%, actually, no, let's say if a win rate you have 25%, your benchmark is 20%. As a sales ops person, you're like, I'm killing it, let's go. And then you look, as a RevOps person, I look at my churn rate. My churn benchmark is 10%, and we're at 15%. That's not good. So as a RevOps person, then what do I do? Then that's where I really provide the value. But I have, again, really simple volume, velocity, conversion at every stage. Look at the benchmark and kind of see like a little like knock or something, right? Like a RevOps knock, and see where the red lights are blinking. So that way I can say things like, hey, our ICP isn't great. They are just tire kickers. They just churn. Or, hey, sales, your handoff to CS is bad. So as RevOps, I say, okay, let's create a sales handoff process, where I look at our CS team and I say, hey, our CS enablement is poor. So there's 3 different options for looking at just comparing 2 conversion rates. So volume, conversion, velocity.
Yeah, I love that. I love the kind of the digging into those, and it's a really easy way to kind of follow that path. Like maybe from a higher level, I would say necessarily just kind of taking that step back, and that's kind of the beauty of RevOps. Really, is having that holistic view across the funnel, right, end to end. And if you don't want to call it, if people don't like the funnel, I like to talk about the buyer journey or the customer, customer life cycle, right? Would use customer journey a lot, but I think it was really that customer life cycle with you, and really looking at across that journey or life cycle, and then seeing where are those gaps, right, towards against your goals for each part of that a part of that life cycle. And that's a great way to just kind of figure out, okay, well, why is this not working well here? And then you dig deeper, right?
And then you dig deeper, and then you have all these projects like, oh wait, I need a new reference. Oh wait, I need this. Oh wait, I need this. And then you kind of kid in a candy shop with solutioning, but at least you have a kind of a path of where the gaps are.
Yeah, definitely.
So I think this one overlaps some, and we've largely answered. So go ahead and jump into. But how do you sell the value of RevOps to leadership? And I think at the heart of it, you already touched on this, Jessica, which is, this is the key to talking to leadership. This is the key to trying to drive, cross-functional, cross-department alignment, all of these things. It's the data. Present it from a data perspective so that everybody is speaking the same language, you're talking about the same goals, all of that stuff. And that's the way I've always had to tackle that side of things. Otherwise, you wind up talking past each other.
Yeah, I think if you kind of, and also if you're starting with sort of where the company needs the strategy, right? What is your go-to-market strategy? What are those key objectives and goals that we're trying to achieve? And then looking at the metrics to, track that performance. And that's where you can really align revenue operations with sometimes maybe like 4 or 5 steps away what you're working on from the overall strategy, but you always tie back to the strategy, right? Have a clear visual and clear communication to the organization about what you're working on and how it directly impacts the company's ability to hit those goals, and always tying back, and then talk about it, communicate early and often and kind of talk through that, because otherwise you're going to be in a position where RevOps continues to look like, a cost center, right? We always talk about how RevOps is kind of the administrator, order taker type of function, and it really isn't, right? RevOps is really that infrastructure and kind of the body that can really support a business and really help them accelerate either growth or retain customers or just be scalable, which is really important these days.
Cool. John asked, how can somebody from a more generalist BizOps role position themselves best to jump into a RevOps role? For me personally, that's actually what I like to look for is, somebody generalist that then has a, either a higher level managerial, oversight type inclination, or they want to get into more specifically or technically something that they were spread too thin or had too many responsibilities to do in a previous role.
Yeah, I think so too. Jessica, what do you think?
Yeah, I think either if it's the company that you're at or a problem, again, look at the communities and see the patterns of the problems that people are having. For example, this is what I would have loved to partner with somebody with is, hey, we have a time to value issue. So I'm, hearing as a generalist and I'm like, well, I don't have anything to do with that. I'm in BizOps, right? So I say, okay, well, why is the time to value important? So say, hey, can I lead in here and see, is there any correlation between, again, our win rates? Is there a correlation between our churn, industry, something like that? And then I could say, okay, hey, we don't have any data between, first meeting, onboarding, and go live. Is that our, so then you can start to build something out in flow. If you're a Salesforce admin and you want to go into more RevOps, start to build out some flows that support a strategic RevOps and even a strategic company function, right? And then just kind of do that. And then those synapses start to connect into your brain. And then when there's a marketing problem, you're like, oh, actually that, MQL to meeting, ooh, that sounds similar to what I did over here. So then you just kind of move those learnings into other parts of the business. Mm-hmm. And then it just kind of comes naturally. Again, any day now, but yeah, that's leaning into those problems and seeing how the solutions overlap between those different functions is very, I think it's cool, especially if you're a more builder operator. Yeah.
Yeah, I think if you're and I don't know for the person that was asking the question, if they're in a role today and they're trying to, jump into a RevOps role. I mean, if you're within a company today, there's plenty of opportunity oftentimes to jump into, especially if you're early stage. If you raise your hand, you will get brought in, but you can, really get involved in other cross-functional projects, right? Get involved in even shadow, sit in, help with, pulling data, learn from the people who are doing RevOps or some type of RevOps there, and also lean into what you're interested in, right? And what you're strong at. If data is your thing, if systems are your thing, if, process is your thing, just kind of leaning in there and, figuring out where your sweet spot is, because you can always get in, dive deep into that one area and then expand across the funnel.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That leaning in piece serves a capacity on both sides of the equation. Like it can externally demonstrate a proficiency, an interest, whatever, to try and get you into that. But personally, selfishly, it also gives you an opportunity to try it on. And so, instead of like, hey, I think I want to do this role or whatever, and then you land in it, it's like, oh God, this isn't anything like I thought it was going to be. What the world was like thinking, it's a way for you to sort of try that on and see how it fits before you have to, before you actually jump into that. That's actually your role, your primary responsibility, all of that stuff. Cool. So next one is one I think everybody's going to have a very strong opinion on, and it's probably going to be the same opinion. When is a good time to have a CRM tool and get out of spreadsheets?
Oh boy.
This is a day one-ish. Also, opinion there. This is where again, spreadsheets are static. when you're responsible for the data pipeline and the data supply chain, spreadsheets are a snapshot, and it's really, really hard to scale with a spreadsheet. I love a good spreadsheet. My whole life is in spreadsheets. Guilty. I also do have a personal Salesforce org for personal stuff and just whatever. But we all know that we love a good spreadsheet. But getting that into a CRM is the key thing to scale. Absolutely, absolutely vital. That is the foundation. That's like building a house without joists. Every time you want to build another story, you have to knock the whole house down. Nobody wants to do that. So get a CRM. If we're not ready for Salesforce, HubSpot is, always a good choice, but something that you can build a foundation on. Jason, is that the opinion that you were expecting?
Oh yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, great.
Rosalind, do you agree?
Yeah, I'm much of the mindset of, the earlier the better, right? Just to start to get your information in there. And sometimes maybe it's not a spreadsheet, maybe it's some kind of database, that you need to have this information. Maybe it's not a CRM yet. But I do think that you need to start, gathering that information, having it in a central repository, and then, kind of migrating. Because I think the hard part is, if you choose the wrong CRM, then there's a whole issue of when you're ready to migrate. That's also a challenge, right? So,
yeah, I would agree with all of that. Yeah, we're all on the same page that I thought we would be in. But it's also a pretty compelling time relative to this question. So, there was a time not too long ago where your options were fairly limited and largely on two sides of the equation. You had something that was relatively light lift to be able to scale up, figure out how to use all of that stuff, but you're going to outgrow relatively quickly. And like what you were alluding to there, Rosalind, then you got pretty significant switching costs. And then on the other side of the equation, you had stuff like Salesforce, where it's like, that's a pretty heavy lift from a standing it up, technical, proficiency side of things, all of that stuff. But you're not going to grow out of it, or it's going to take you a long time to grow out of it. But like, that's a heavy lift, and also can be or gets to be relatively expensive relatively quickly. Now you've got stuff like HubSpot, where they've really scaled out that CRM capacity, where you can ride. One, it's dirt cheap, or can be even free for you, depending on where you are in those stages and stuff like that. So you don't have a cost. It's very user friendly, but it's also very rich in its feature functionality, integrations that it has and stuff like that, where you can ride that for a very long time and possibly indefinitely. And so, it's a time where it's easier and cheaper to jump in early than it's ever been.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we are at the end of our time here. So this has been a fantastic conversation. Rosalind, thank you so much. And let me just call out really quickly our sponsor, Apparatus, one more time. So hats off and thank you to Apparatus. They're the ones that allow us to be able to do these types of events. Thank you so much, guys.
Yeah, thank you. This was a lot of fun. Great to collaborate with all of you.